1500 प्रीलोडेड गानों वाला कीपैड फोन धमाकेदार साउंड के साथ कारवा मोबाइल.
Hi, this is Utkarsh Patel, and welcome to the world of stories from epics, myths, legends and folk tales. Today I'm going to tell you a story which many of you might know, but in a very different form. This is the story of Shakuntala. Shakuntala by sage Vyas from Mahabharata. Shakuntala is one of childhood's most cherished stories and widely read romantic stories, or novels depending on what one has read. A sweet romance of a king who meets a damsel, expresses love, gets married and parts to return later. Enter an angry sage disturb his penance by seducing him. Post-seduction, Menka gave birth to a baby, but both Menka and Vishwamitra deserted the baby, who was a symbol of victory for Menka and that of defeat for Vishwamitra. It is said that sage Kanva found the deserted baby under the care of peacocks and thus named her Shakuntalalita, Shakunt meaning peacock and Lalita meaning in the loving care of, which was later shortened to Shakuntala. Shakuntala was brought up by sage Kanva in his ashram and soon grew up to be a beautiful lady with the looks of her mother, Menka. Once Dushyant, the prince of Hastinapur, came to the ashram to meet sage Kanva and was immediately smitten by Shakuntala's beauty. When he came to know that the sage was away on a pilgrimage with some other sages and would return only after a few days, he expressed his desire to marry Shakuntala. The lady suggested that they wait for her foster father's arrival, but Dushyant expressed his inability to wait and suggested the option of a Gandharva Viva, a custom where the elders were not required as long as the two had decided to get married. At this, Shakuntala agreed with a condition that the child born of her would be the heir to the kingdom of Hastinapur. Dushyant agreed and the two got married, and after consummating the marriage, Dushyant left without bothering to wait for sage Kanva's return. He left with a promise that he would send for her soon. When sage Kanva returned, he was apprised of the wedding. Soon enough, Shakuntala gave birth to a son who was named Sarvadaman, the subduer of all. When after many years there was no sign of Dushyant, despite the numerous letters sent by Shakuntala, sage Kanva suggested that Sarvadaman be taken to the king, as it was time for him to learn the ways of a Kshatriya. When Shakuntala and Sarvadaman reached the palace of Dushyant and introduced themselves to him, he had no recollection of any marriage. There follows an extensive dialogue where Shakuntala stands her ground. Dushyant makes some derogatory remarks about her and Shakuntala retorts back that her only objective was to get her son the rightful place and not to lead the life of luxury. She reminds him of the true role of a king and how his acts would leave a wrong impression on his subjects. Her speech impresses the courtiers. To cut short the story, after a strong dialogue between the two, where Shakuntala berates the king and looks down upon him as a king, the gods from the heavens intervene and came to the rescue of Shakuntala and assured Dushyant about the truth of the wedding. Dushyant then accepted both, and it is said that Dushyant is supposed to have told Shakuntala that he did recognize her immediately, but did not give in, as his subjects would not have been able to accept her so easily. The approval from the gods had made things easier and better. Some interesting observations here. According to Vyasa's version, Shakuntala was brought up with the full knowledge of the fact that she was deserted by her parents. Her agreement to Dushyant's proposal did not need parental approval. She took her own decision. She even made a condition which goes on to show that she wanted to ensure that her child was not neglected as she was once and got his rightful due. At the court of Dushyant, she is not seen fighting for her right, but for the right of her son, as is evident in the elaborate speech which has the courtiers spellbound, and at one stage they begin to believe her. She is depicted as an extremely confident and a determined woman out to get justice without breaking down. Kalidas used the angle of curse and the lost ring to justify the forgetfulness of Dushyant, while Vyas simply went ahead and exposed Dushyant's lustful rendezvous. Vyasa's Shakuntala was not a damsel in distress shedding copious tears. She fought for her right and got her way, and did not succumb to the man irrespective of his position and stature. She was amongst the first women in Mahabharata who fights for her rights in a man's world and gets her due. While Kalidas's Shakuntala made good romantic fairy tale tearjerker, Vyasa's Shakuntala was more heroic and what a modern woman ought to be. The firebrand version envisioned by Vyas gives way to the tragic, distressed woman of Kalidas, and unfortunately, the image has stuck on. If you enjoyed the story of Shakuntala and its original version, come back for more. When it comes to Indian epics, we seldom go beyond Ramayana and Mahabharata. A unique epic that has gone relatively unnoticed beyond its place of origin is the Tamil epic Shilapadikaram, or the Tale of an Anklet. This epic was written around the 5th or the 6th century AD by a Jain monk, Ilango Adigal, or the Prince Ascetic. It is said that an oracle had predicted that he would be a better king as against his elder brother. To prove the prophecy wrong, he embraced monkhood and allowed his elder brother to ascend the throne. The epic encompasses three well-known regimes of the south: the Cholas, the Pandyas, and the Chera kingdoms. The other significant aspect of this epic, and also a major differentiator from the other epics, is that this epic deals with the ordinary mortals and their lives. This is not only an extremely interesting epic, but is also a very different from all the epics known, be it the well-known Ramayana and Mahabharata or the Greek Iliad and the Odyssey. First, it was written by a Jain monk who heard the story from a source before writing an epic on it. While Ilango was a Jain, he focused on the local times and ensured that all the focus was on prevalent religions like Hinduism and Buddhism. Though he was a monk, every aspect of life, with all its flavors, be they marital life, arts and music, or the sensual facets of life, he covered them all with rich details. A rarity for a monk to describe them with such awareness and perfection. Let us go through the story of Shilapadikaram. In the city of Puhar of Chola kingdom, there lived a merchant and his family. The son of the merchant, Kovalan, gets married to a beautiful girl by the name of Kannagi, and they lived happily. Kovalan, being a soon comes across a dancer, Madhavi, and falls in love with her. The two started spending a lot of time together in music and dance, and soon they even have a daughter. During all this time, Kannagi took good care of her aged in-laws, who in turn had started despising their own son. Kannagi, however, never complained, even though she knew that Kovalan was wasting away the family fortune on Madhavi. Once during the famous festival of Indra, when Madhavi was performing, Kovalan got suspicious about Madhavi. He thought that Madhavi was having an affair with someone else, and the song professing her love was directed at that person and not him. Kovalan was hurt, and he realized his mistake and went back home to his wife and family. While Kannagi was happy at her husband's return, they soon realized that they had no wealth on them and there was a need to start life afresh. When Madhavi realized that Kovalan had left her, she sent a message to Kovalan pleading him to return. But Kovalan was not willing to heed her pleas and concluded that he had nothing to do with her, as he had seen through her deception. Kannagi had a pair of anklets given to her by her mother during her wedding, and they decided to sell it and start a new life in the city of Madurai, which was under the reign of the Pandyan king. Kovalan and Kannagi traveled to Madurai, and on the way they received help and encouragement from many locals and a Jain nun. When they reach the outskirts of Madurai, Kovalan leaves his wife under the care of some locals and goes to the city with one of Kannagi's anklets to sell. Kovalan was impressed with the tall buildings and the affluence of the city and thought that they would be able to rebuild their life once again. In the city of Madurai, Kovalan came across a goldsmith and showed him the anklet for sale. The goldsmith had in reality stolen a similar anklet of the Pandyan queen. He took the opportunity to absolve himself. He asked Kovalan to wait for him as he wanted to show the anklet to the queen, as such an anklet could be bought only by her. The goldsmith then went to the king and told him that he had found the thief who had stolen the queen's anklet, and he had made him wait at his shop. During those days, the queen was not on talking terms with the king due to some misunderstanding. The king seized the opportunity to impress upon her, and without getting into the facts of the matter, ordered immediate execution of the thief. The soldiers reached the goldsmith's shop and killed Kovalan, who had no idea what had happened behind him. When Kannagi came to know about her husband's execution, she rushed to the palace. She proved to the king that the anklet shown by the goldsmith was hers and not the queen's, as she had other ones too. Besides, her anklet had rubies inside it, while the queen's had pearls. The king realized his mistake, and as a sign of his guilt, his scepter had bent for all to see the injustice committed by the king. The king died of shock, and so did the queen. But Kannagi's wrath had not been satiated with the death of the king and the queen. She was angry that her husband was killed without even being heard, and the crime was done by none less than the king himself. In a state of extreme anger, she pulled out one of her breasts and hurled it at the city, invoking the god of fire to burn down the entire city which had wronged her husband, leaving the good, of course. The epic mentions that due to the power of her chastity, fire was compelled to burn down the city of Madurai. The patron goddess of the royal family approached Kannagi and calmed her. She explained to her the reason behind the tragedy. According to the goddess, both Kovalan and Kannagi were connected in their previous birth. In their previous birth, Kovalan had killed Kannagi's husband by mistake, and in sorrow, Kannagi had committed suicide, both having committed the sin of taking life. Kovalan took someone else's, while Kannagi took her own. No matter how virtuous a life one leads, one cannot escape the sins of one's previous life, and the tragedy that both had faced was due to their past sins. Having learned the cause of her troubles, she withdrew her curse and the fire abated. On the advice of the goddess, she reached a hill in the nearby kingdom of the Cheras, where after 15 days she died. Lord Indra himself came down and took the soul of Kannagi to the heavens, where she was united with Kovalan. In the meanwhile, the story of her death spread all over, and in due course of time, Kannagi was deified, and people started worshipping Kannagi, also known as Pattini in Sri Lanka, as the goddess of chastity and fidelity. In the final segment of the epic, the king of Chera heard the story of Kannagi and how it was from his region that she had left for the heavens. The king was impressed by the journey of Kannagi through 3 kingdoms of the Tamil kingdom and took it on him to build a statue of Kannagi. He journeyed to the north to get a block of stone from the Himalayas for carving her idol. After a journey to the north and back through some battles, the king returned with a block of stone suitable for carving the idol of Kannagi. A temple was built in honor of the goddess Kannagi and hailed as the symbol of chastity and fidelity. Amongst all the well-known epics of the world, this is probably the only one which has a female as a central character. While the focus is on chastity and the fidelity of Kannagi, there is no denying that she is the hero of the epic. Her character is above suspicion, and her chastity had the power to invoke the gods, who had no choice but to attend to her. Kannagi's heroism shows up when she doesn't take her husband's death as her destiny and simply end her life. She rushes to the court, gets her husband's name absolved of the allegation, and punishes both the king and the city which had harmed her husband and her marital life. Unfortunately, in present times, she is remembered more for her chastity than her courage to question the king's judgment and even punishing him and his kingdom for the same. At a time when Sanskrit dramas were eulogizing the kings and the gods, this Tamil literature had the courage to eulogize an ordinary mortal and show the royalty guilty of injustice. It sure needed courage to write an epic where one has questioned the sense of justice of the king. This epic was written with some very clear objectives. 1. Not even the king will be spared if he makes an error of judgment. 2. A woman with high moral standards will not only be respected but even worshipped. And 3. No matter how virtuous a life one leads, one cannot avoid the fruits of one's past deeds. Another interesting aspect is the characterization of the other woman, that is Madhavi. While Madhavi was a dancing girl whose life revolved around music, dance and riches, she is treated with a lot of respect. Her knowledge of music and dance is exemplary. She gives birth to a daughter of Kovalan, a sign of her love for Kovalan. She even pleads for his return when Kovalan leaves her for good. In the entire epic, nowhere has Madhavi been blamed for breaking the relationship of the happy couple. Even Kovalan blames destiny for the breakup, not Madhavi. Even the parents of Kovalan blame their son, but not Madhavi. Later, Madhavi is seen becoming a Buddhist nun as a sign of atoning for her act. It called for a lot of maturity by the author to create such a character, and needless to say, for the audience to even accept such a character. A statue of Kannagi can be found even today at the Marina Beach in Chennai, India today. If you've enjoyed this unique epic and its unique portrayal of characters, do come back for more of such stories. Today we will talk of one such interesting story called Draupadi, the goddess of the forest. We are all familiar with Draupadi as the heroine of the epic Mahabharata, but there is another Draupadi, a raging and fierce goddess who lives in folk tales and myths in parts of South India and in Rajasthan. She is worshipped in these places in a pure, virginal and fiery form. One such story about Draupadi as the goddess of the forest goes like this. The Pandavas were in exile, eking out a living from the forest. Draupadi was with them and during the day was by their side, sharing their sufferings and joys in equal measure. However, as night fell, she would disappear, and for a long time her flight from a tent went unnoticed, as no one dared to look in on her without her wish. Night after night, this was the story, until one day Bhima saw her leaving the campsite. He was perturbed and asked Krishna about it, who of course knew the whole story. Krishna warned Bhima that he should not try and stop her, for if he did, she would devour him. But Krishna also told him that he would need to devise a way to keep Draupadi confined to a tent at nights. But Krishna also told him that they would need to devise a way to keep Draupadi confined to a tent at night. For the form that she took every night as she went out into the forest, Krishna said, was a danger to all of them. Draupadi was another form of the goddess Bhadrakali or Cheliamman and such other goddesses, said Krishna. And every night she went into the forest as she sought the sacrifices due to her. She raided the forest for animals and birds, and when she was satiated, she resumed her daytime form as the wife of the Pandavas. There was only one way to stop her, Krishna told Bhima, and that would be to lock her up within her palm leaf hut and not let her out until she promised to give up her nocturnal adventures. Bhima managed to lock her in, but Draupadi was so angry that she pierced Bhima's wrist with her sharp fingernails, and 5 drops of his blood fell onto the forest floor, giving birth to 5 sons. There could be many interpretations as to why Draupadi takes on such a form, but what is striking is the depiction of a heroine from the epic as a strong and violent goddess who is feared by all, even the brave Pandavas. If you found this folk version of Draupadi's story interesting, come back for some more of such interesting stories from the epics. The fact that some of them are lesser known sometimes also makes them quite misunderstood as stories. For example, the story of Medea from the Greek mythology. Medea, often referred to as Medea the Barbarian. This is a story about a woman whom posterity has painted as a witch. Her contribution to her husband has been overlooked for all the crimes that she committed for the man she loved the most. Medea, often called Medea the Barbarian or even Medea the Witch. However, I prefer to call her Medea the Wronged. Medea was the daughter of the king of Colchis, the land which had the magical golden fleece, which however was guarded by a dragon. Jason, a young prince of the Argonauts' fame, was sent to Colchis to get the fleece, which had golden hair, as a part of an unachievable task given to him. When the king learns the cause of his arrival, he is upset and sets certain conditions for parting with the fleece. While they were equally unachievable and daunting to say the least, Jason completes the task, much to the surprise of the king. What was unknown to the king was that Jason was secretly helped by Medea, the daughter of the king, as she had fallen in love with Jason, which again was a result of a divine conspiracy. Goddess Hera had instructed the god of love to make Medea fall in love with Jason, as she was rumored to have magical powers which would be needed by Jason to achieve the tasks given to him. When the king learnt about his daughter's betrayal, he was angry and he chased a fleeing Jason and Medea, since the latter had no choice but to flee with Jason. Soon Medea and Jason reached their country, but Jason's uncle, who had usurped the throne, was unwilling to part with it. With the help of Medea, Jason manages to eliminate the uncle, which unfortunately did not go down well with the people, and once again Jason and Medea, along with their 2 children, had to flee, and they reached Corinth, seeking asylum at Corinth. At Corinth, the king of Corinth was aware of the fame and heroism of Jason, but was apprehensive of Medea's powers. He agrees to allow Jason to stay there, but his condition was that Medea should leave. Much to Medea's surprise, she learns that Jason had agreed to marry the king's daughter, who was extremely beautiful. The king of Corinth was uncomfortable with the presence of Medea, whose reputation had preceded her in Corinth. He took it upon himself to banish Medea and her children from Corinth, as Medea had made her disapproval of the marriage of Jason and the princess public, in no uncertain terms. The king wanted her to leave immediately, but Medea managed to beg a day to make arrangements for the departure. The king was uncomfortable, but agreed reluctantly to give her no more than the dawn of the next day. When Jason learned about the banishment, he ended up blaming Medea and washed his hands off from being able to do anything or even intervening in the said matter. Instead, he offered her money as an aid which she would need during her exile, which Medea, of course, declined. Clearly, Jason had found new family and couldn't care much for Medea. Medea was aware that Jason had a soft corner for his children, and if he wanted to intervene, it was only for the children and not so much for Medea. She approached Jason and reasoned with him that it wouldn't be easy for her to take care of the children in exile. Now that she was away, could he take care of the children? As a token of her appreciation, she would send the children to the princess. Jason found it reasonable and accepted it, and was sure that his new bride would have no problems with the arrangement as long as Medea was not in Corinth. To reflect her change of heart, she sent her children with gifts to the princess. The children took with them a robe and a small crown for her as gifts. The princess was happy to learn that Medea was leaving. When the children had left, she decided to try the gifts. She put on the robe and she put on the crown. Unknown to the princess, the robe and the crown had poison in them. As soon as she wore the robe and put on the crown, her body was covered with poison which ate into her, and she died even before she could realize what had happened to her. When the king saw the dead body of his daughter, he tried to save her, and when he realized she was dead, he embraced her in grief. The poison soon spread over him too, and he met with a slow but torturous death. When the news of the deaths in the palace reached Medea, she made her final move. She entered into the bedroom of her children and killed her own children. By now, Jason had heard about the deaths of the children and the princess. He rushed into Medea's room as he was sure that the soldiers of Corinth would kill his children. When he reached the room, he learned that his children too had been murdered. He broke open the bedroom door of his children only to find them missing. He could see Medea flying away in a flying chariot with the dead bodies of their children, depriving Jason of even the last look and the last rites of the children he so loved. Medea escaped to Athens and left Jason with neither family nor a loved one, and deprived him of all that he craved for in his life. This brings an end to the tragic life of Medea according to the play by Euripides. The story of Medea is not simply a tale of love and vengeance. It's a beautiful drama of love, passion, in its extremities though. It brings out the strength of passion along with the suffering of spurned love, leading to the terrible consequences of vengeance. The great sorceress ends up being portrayed as a weak woman succumbing to the emotions of love. For Medea, the crime or the hurt of being spurned by the man for whom she left her home, country and reputation was much stronger than the subsequent murders that led her to a life of uncertainty, which she had foreseen, and thus the plan to escape made well in advance. While many might not agree with her murdering her own children, this was dramatically expressed in the turmoil she goes through before she slays them. There was no dearth of love for the children. Rather, it was love that made her kill her children rather than they be killed by the men of the king or grow up to be vengeful creatures. Was it a mother killing her children to save them from a barbarous and torturous death by the king's soldiers? Or was it a mother killing her children just to deprive their father of the love of his children? Is quite debatable. Finally, she leaves with the bodies of her children, depriving Jason of even the last rites of the children he so loved. However cruel this may sound, the pain that Jason goes through is the emotional victory for Medea. Not that she could escape the emotional turmoil of killing her own children herself. Medea's actions are downright despicable, but then matters of heart are never judged by the rules of the mind. The inner recesses of a woman's mind are unfathomable, and the ire of a spurned woman is more so. Is a woman just a lover, or wife, and finally a mother, is she not an individual who has a right to express her hatred and indignation? Must her expression of indignation always be within the boundaries of expected behavior of cultural norms? Media defies these and expresses her anger and resentment in her own way, which goes against the set norms of a dutiful wife or a motherly love. Her passion is intense, although with aberrations which are wild, but by these aberrations she either reigns or ruins wayward men. If Macbeth was a victim of his ambitions fueled by his wife and thus a tragic villain, and Othello a victim of suspicion and jealousy, why was Medea not a victim of selfishness and infidelity? Was it because Jason had already been a designated hero? What do you think? Think about these stories. Think about the alternate ways of interpreting such stories. And if you find these stories interesting and thought-provoking, come back for some more of these kind of stories. Though Ramayana is the story of Ram, the epic is also well known for some of its female characters like that of Sita, Kaushalya, and even Kaikeyi. But there have been some lesser known women who have not found much mention, even when characters like Manthara and Shabri find some mention and attention. Today we will talk about one of them, and that is Urmila, Lakshman's wife. Urmila is considered to be the most tragic characters in the epic. What might not be known to many is that Urmila was the daughter of King Janak and was thus the sister of Sita. Why this has not been mentioned often is not quite known. Urmila is tragic as she is supposed to have spent Vanvas, stay in the forest, without going to the Van, that is the forest. When Ram, Sita and Lakshman were leaving for the forest, she too wanted to accompany her husband like Sita. But Lakshman is supposed to have said that he is going to serve his brother and sister-in-law, and likewise she should stay back to serve his parents. Urmila stayed back to serve her father-in-law, who of course died soon, and 3 mother-in-laws. While all the brothers, that is Ram, Bharat and Shatrughan, had their wives with them, she was the only one who did not have her husband by her side for 14 long years. Some versions mention that she did not step out of her room for 14 years, while some say that she slept for 14 long years. This seclusion is viewed by many as leading a life of extreme deprivation of worldly life in the absence of her husband. A number of scholars have attributed small episodes to her, but they all depict her as a person whose existence was to follow instructions and not opine. She probably lived like a nun, a life of servitude in solitude at the peak of her youth. According to a South Indian version, it is believed that Urmila slept for 14 years during the period of exile. This was because Lakshman had taken a vow to protect Ram and Sita all the time and didn't want to sleep even at night. He had requested the goddess of sleep, that is Nidra Devi, to spare him his mandatory sleeping hours. When the goddess pleaded inability as the balance had to be maintained and that she needed someone to take his sleeping hours, Lakshman is supposed to have suggested that she go to Urmila, who accepted it as her husband's wish. This has been very soulfully captured in the Telugu poem Urmila Devi Nidram. The famous Hindi poet Maithili Sharan Gupta was so disappointed with Valmiki's treatment of Urmila that he wrote his own epic by the name of Saket, based it on Ramayana, whose heroine was not Sita but Urmila. The Nobel laureate Rabindranath Tagore too is supposed to have lamented this treatment or mistreatment of Urmila by Valmiki. According to Tagore, Valmiki had shown Lakshman as the ideal brother, but completely forgot Urmila, who was left all alone in Ayodhya for 14 long years. Truly an unsung heroine of the epic. Finally, many have wondered why were characters like Urmila or even Mandodari, that is Ravan's wife, not given their due attention. Often it has been seen that at the beginning of the plot, a number of characters are drawn, which gives it a feel of an epic. Like in all epics, besides the main plot, there are subplots and many side plots. This is like the tributaries of a main river, all converging into the main river. Though the author sets these characters with a set of ideas, in due course ends up focusing only on the main characters or future characters and leaves a few by the side. This leads to some well-begun but half-baked characters in due course of time. Urmila was probably one of them. However, Urmila's contribution in terms of sacrifice, an important virtue in Indian culture, is of epic proportions and thus warranted a discussion. If you found this story of Urmila, a lesser known character from epic Ramayana, interesting, come back for more. Till then, let me listen to my favorite song and you listen to yours on Saregama Karma.